the night watcher of Stonefield Cemetery. When I first took the job as a night security guard at Stonefield Cemetery, I didn't expect anything except silence, boredom, and maybe the occasional stray animal. The cemetery wasn't small, nearly 4 acres, but most of the graves were old, some from the 1800s. The caretakers didn't bother with many of them anymore. My job was mostly just walking the paths, checking that no teenagers snuck in to drink or mess around. I thought the worst thing I'd ever see would be a drunk trying to steal a statue. I was wrong, but I didn't know it on my first night. That night was almost peaceful. The air was cold, the way it often is before midnight. The trees around the cemetery formed a kind of natural wall, their branches stretched like fingers. Every time the wind moved through them, it sounded like whispering. I remember thinking, if I get used to this sound, I'll survive this job. For a while, nothing happened. I walked the paths with my flashlight, checked the gates, watched shadows shift between the headstones. Always illusions, always tricks of light. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed something odd. One of the motion sensor lights flickered on near the old mausoleum, the large stone structure near the far northeast corner. It was built in 1904 according to the plaque. The stone door was sealed shut with rusted metal bars. No one had been buried there since 1938. I went to check it out. No animals, no people, just the wind. But the light kept flickering. And for one tiny second, I felt the ground tremble under my feet. I convinced myself I imagined it. That was night 1. Nothing more. But things never start big. They start small, subtle. 2. The second night, I arrived at 10 p.m. as always. The air felt heavier, the kind of heaviness you get before a thunderstorm. Except the sky was clear. The caretaker, an older guy named Pete, handed me the keys and said, "Stay away from the mausoleum tonight." I laughed. Why? His face didn't change. Because last night someone reported hearing knocking from inside it. He said it so calmly that I froze for a moment. "Probably raccoons," I said. "No raccoon can get inside. That place is sealed." He stared at me for a moment. "Just do your rounds. And if you hear anything, don't check alone." He walked off without another word. I wanted to believe he was messing with me, but Pete wasn't that type. Still, I shrugged it off. By midnight, everything was quiet again until it wasn't. It started with tapping. Soft, faint, like someone gently tapping metal. I followed the sound through the rows of graves until I reached the mausoleum again. The sound was coming from inside. Top, top, top. Rhythmic, not random. I tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, expanding stone, temperature changes. Cemeteries are full of old structures. They make noises. But then the tapping stopped, and something scraped the inside of the stone door. I stepped back. Nothing happened for a full minute. Then the motion sensor light above me flickered and died. Total darkness. My flashlight suddenly felt too small for the world. I backed away slowly. I didn't look away from the door until I reached the path. I shouldn't have returned the next night, but I needed the job. 3. The third night. This night changed everything. I did my rounds, trying to avoid the mausoleum, but around 3 a.m. my radio crackled, though no one else was on the frequency. A voice whispered, "Don't let her out." I dropped the radio. When I picked it back up, there was only static. The whisper didn't sound like a prank. It sounded old, dry, as if the throat that made it hadn't tasted water in a very long time. I tried to call the caretaker. No signal. At 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor light near the mausoleum turned on by itself again. I walked closer. I told myself I was doing my job. But in reality, I think curiosity was dragging me like a rope. When I reached it, I noticed something new. The metal bars that sealed the door weren't aligned the same way. They looked bent, only slightly, but enough that someone or something had pushed from the inside. I lifted my flashlight. There, in the dust on the stone door, were fresh fingerprints, 5 long streaks dragging downward. Something was inside, something that could reach the door. I backed away, heart following some primal rhythm. As I retreated, I saw movement in the far corner of my vision. A figure, not fully visible, just the edge of a shadow slipping behind a tree. "Hello," I called out. Silence. I aimed my flashlight, nothing. When I lowered it, the shadow was standing behind the mausoleum. Tall, thin, wrongly shaped. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. I left an hour early that night. For the fourth night, I told Pete what I saw. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He didn't even question my sanity. Instead, he quietly said, "Don't approach the mausoleum again." I asked him why. His answer chilled me more than anything I'd heard so far. That thing inside wasn't buried. He didn't explain further. That night I carried pepper spray, a longer flashlight, and a heavy wrench. I told myself the weapons were pointless, but having them helped me breathe. Everything was quiet for hours, until 2:40 a.m., when every single motion sensor light in the cemetery turned on at once. Not flickered, turned on, as if the entire cemetery had sensed movement everywhere. I froze, and then I heard it, a slow, heavy knock from inside the mausoleum. Then another, then silence. I should have run. Anyone else would have. But something pushed me forward, fear, curiosity, the desire to understand. I walked toward the mausoleum. Halfway there, I saw something that made me stop cold. The door was slightly open, just a crack, but it had never been open before. And from that crack, a handprint smeared outward across the stone. Fresh, dust disturbed. Something had pushed the door, not enough to open it fully, but enough to break the seal. I stepped closer. The crack was dark inside. Too dark, black like ink. I lifted my flashlight. Something inside moved. Softly, a shifting sound like bare feet sliding over stone. Then a whisper so faint it might have been imagination. "You're late." I stumbled back. The motion sensor light above the mausoleum blew out with a pop. Total darkness swallowed everything around me. Everything except the crack through which I saw an eye. Watching me. Not dead. Not alive. Something in between. I ran and didn't look back. The fifth night. The night someone came out. I shouldn't have returned. But fear does strange things. Sometimes it pulls you closer instead of pushing you away. The cemetery was too quiet this night. No insects. No wind. Not even the trees dared to move. At 1:13 a.m., the footsteps started. Slow. Measured. Dragging. They circled the mausoleum. I wasn't near it, but I could hear them. Something walking. Pacing around and around and around, waiting. Then the radio crackled again. A woman's voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The footsteps stopped. I froze. Then suddenly, bang. The mausoleum door slammed. Another bang. Another. Stone against stone, metal groaning under pressure. Something was pushing the door open from the inside. Then, it opened. Not wide, but wide enough. A hand slid out first, pale, thin, with dirt collected under the nails. Then a foot. Then a face. Not decayed, but drained. Colorless. A woman. Her dress was old-fashioned, torn at the hem. Her hair was long like strands of wet rope. Her skin looked like she hadn't touched sunlight in decades. She stepped out silently. Nobody's. No sound. She turned her head and looked directly at me, even though I was hiding behind a row of headstones. Her neck moved too slowly, too evenly, like she wasn't using muscles but something else. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she walked, not toward me, thank God, but toward the gate. Each step was unnatural, like she wasn't used to walking but was remembering how. When she passed the motion sensor lights, they didn't turn on. They turned off. Everywhere she walked, the lights died. She reached the gate, turned her head once more, then disappeared into the night. 6. The final night. The police didn't believe me. Pete didn't show up for work the next morning. The owner of the cemetery told me to forget what I saw, and reminded me I signed a contract. But I couldn't forget. The handprints on the stone. The voice in the radio. The woman walking out into the night after decades or more. Sealed inside. On my last night, I found something. Right outside the mausoleum door, now wide open, was a footprint. Not hers.
Mine.
Except, it wasn't where I had stepped. It was facing the mausoleum, closer than I had ever gotten, as if I had stood right at the door and spoken to whatever was inside. And on the stone wall next to it, written with a finger through dust, "See you soon." I quit that night. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I hear tapping on my bedroom wall. Soft, rhythmic, familiar, like someone reminding me that I never should have opened that door, even if I didn't open it myself.